Long before Adiz became a wife and a mother, she was the pride of her parents, Pa Obi and Mama Obi Ajili. They were simple farmers, people of the earth, who worked from dawn until dusk under the sun. Their hands were calloused and their backs bent from years of hard labor. They had no schooling of their own. Both could barely even write their names. But they understood one thing with absolute clarity. Education was a key. It was the kind of key that could unlock a door they had never been able to walk through, a door to a world of possibilities they could only dream of. The day Adiz was born, her father wept. It wasn't because she was a girl, even though many men in the village would sigh when their wives bore daughters. No, he wept because he saw something in her tiny hands, clenched so tight, as if she were already holding on to something precious. He looked at his wife, his eyes shining, and said, This one will go further than we ever dreamed. Even if I have to sell every single goat I own." And he meant every word. From her very first day in school, Adiz was different. She was small, quick to smile, and her thirst for knowledge was unquenchable. Her teachers adored her, not just because she was clever, but because she was fiercely determined. Every morning, she walked 5 miles to school, sometimes barefoot, sometimes through the pouring rain. But she never, ever missed a day. Her parents would wait for her each evening, sitting outside their humble mud house as she read aloud from her school books, her young voice filling the twilight air. The neighbors would sometimes laugh softly, teasing her father. "Obi," they'd say, "your daughter will soon forget us small people when she becomes a big woman in the city." Pa Obi would just smile, his chest swelling with pride. "Let her forget this suffering if she must," he would reply. "That's what we are working for." Money was always tight. There were times when Adiz's school fees were paid weeks late. Her uniforms were patched in several places, and her sandals seemed to break at the worst possible moments. But she carried herself with a quiet, unshakable dignity. Her mother, Mama Obi Ajili, would often hold her close and whisper, "My daughter, knowledge is wealth. Learn all you can. You are the only girl we have. You are our light." Looking back on her girlhood, Adiz often thought of it as a time of innocent confusion. It was a season when her body began to change in ways she didn't understand, and no one told her why. In her village, such things were not spoken of openly. Mothers loved their daughters with a fierce, protective love, but they spoke about womanhood in hushed tones, as if it were a secret too heavy to name, a burden to be carried in silence. So when Adiz's body started its inevitable transformation, when her chest began to ache and her clothes no longer fit the same way, she was terrified. She thought she had fallen sick. She hid her discomfort, afraid to ask questions, afraid of the answers she might receive. The day she first saw blood on her wrapper, she panicked. She was only 12 years old. She ran to the back of the house, scrubbing furiously at the stain with water and ash, her small body trembling all over. In her young mind, she was convinced she was dying. Later that day, her mother found her, pale and shaken. One look at her daughter's face, and she understood immediately. She led Adiz inside and gently closed the door. "It is nothing to fear," her mother said softly, her hands fumbling with a piece of old cloth. "It means you are now a woman." But that was all she said. There was no explanation, no guidance, just a quiet instruction to wash and stay indoors for a few days. It wasn't her mother's fault. Mama Obiagili had grown up the exact same way, learning about her own body not through words and understanding, but through silence and experience. To talk about such things openly was considered shameful and proper. So, Adiz learned on her own. She pieced together fragments of information from the older girls in the village, from whispered conversations overheard at the stream, from the curious way the women started looking at her now. She didn't understand what her body was preparing her for, the intricate cycles of pain and renewal, the incredible possibility of creating life. All she knew was that something irreversible had changed within her, and she was expected to simply know what to do, as if by magic. After that first confusing, frightening moment of womanhood, Adiz found herself lost in a world she didn't understand. No one had told her what to do, not how to care for her body, not how to stay clean, not what any of these changes truly meant. So, she did what she could with the little she knew. She tore old rags from her worn-out wrappers, washing them secretly at night in the stream so no one would see. She would dry them behind the house, hidden under a pile of leaves. The cloths were often still damp when she had to use them again, but she didn't know any better. No teacher at school ever explained that this could cause infections. No aunt ever leaned in to whisper advice about proper hygiene. And her mother, though loving and kind, avoided the topic completely, her own face tightening with embarrassment whenever Adiz tried to build up the courage to ask. The silence was a wall between them, a wall built by generations of unspoken tradition. So Adiz grew into womanhood completely unprepared, her body maturing far faster than her understanding. At school, she would sit quietly at her desk, consumed with a constant fear of standing up, terrified that someone might notice a stain. Her classmates would laugh about such things behind cupped hands, calling it the women's problem, but no one ever truly talked about it. The shame was a shared, silent burden. By the time she reached 16, Adiz often felt tired and unwell. She sometimes suffered from rashes or persistent pain, but she assumed it was all a normal part of being a woman. No one had ever told her otherwise. She didn't know how to explain it to anyone. She didn't even have the words. The vocabulary of her own health was a foreign language she had never been taught. Then, one day, a letter arrived. When Adiz gained admission into the university, it felt like the sky had cracked open and poured pure sunlight onto her family's small compound. She still remembered that morning vividly. Her name printed in neat black letters, the university crest shining faintly at the top of the page. It was a symbol of a new world. Her mother had danced around the compound, laughing through her tears. "You see, Obi? You see," she shouted to her husband, waving the letter like a victory flag. "Our daughter is going to wear the gown of wisdom." The entire village seemed to celebrate with them. For Adiz, it was more than just a dream fulfilled. It was a promise kept. A promise to her parents, to their sacrifices, and to herself. She had worked so hard, studying by the dim flicker of a lantern, walking those long, dusty miles, all to reach this very point. In the quiet moments, she could almost hear her late father's voice in her heart, a proud and loving whisper. "Go, my daughter. Go and see the world we never saw." University wasn't just an education. It was a passage to a different life, a chance to finally understand the world. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to finally understand herself. When she first set foot on campus, Adiz was a ship in a vast, unfamiliar ocean. The university was a world away from her quiet village. Towering buildings scraped the sky, throngs of students moved like a single, chattering river, and the air buzzed with a sound she couldn't quite name: freedom. But this newfound independence was a double-edged sword. It brought with it temptations she had never encountered. Boys, drawn to her quiet grace and the way she held her books like a shield, began to notice her. Some would trail her after lectures, their voices a little too loud as they asked for her number. Others, with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, offered to help her with assignments. Adiz was lost. Back home, a respectful distance was always maintained between boys and girls. Here, they were bold, their words slick, their hands sometimes reaching for hers without an invitation. It sent a jolt of anxiety through her. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, a constant, low hum of warning. "Avoid boys, my daughter. They will ruin your future." And so, she built a fortress around herself. Her life became a simple, straight line, from her lecture hall to the hushed halls of the library, and straight back to her hostel room. While her roommates transformed themselves for parties and late-night adventures, Adiz remained behind, lost in the pages of a book or the familiar comfort of writing a letter home. They would sometimes laugh at her. "You're too serious, Adiz," one of them once said, mid-application of lipstick. "You act like a nun." Adiz would just offer a small, tight smile and reply, "Books don't break hearts." But it wasn't just heartbreak she feared. It was a deeper uncertainty. No one had ever taught her the language of love, only the grammar of shame and avoidance. She was terrified of making a mistake, of being judged, of losing the respect she was working so hard to build. Yet, a quiet curiosity simmered beneath the surface. Sometimes, her gaze would linger on a couple walking hand in hand across the campus green, their laughter echoing in the evening air. She wondered what that felt like, to be seen, to be chosen, to feel the warmth of someone's affection. There was one boy, Emeka, from her department. He was different, quiet, respectful. He never pushed, never teased. They'd study in the library, and he'd bring her roasted groundnuts wrapped in newspaper, a small, kind gesture that spoke volumes. He seemed to admire her seriousness, and she, in turn, admired his gentle nature. But even with Emeka, Adiz kept her walls up. She had come to the university with a single, burning purpose: to make her parents proud, to rewrite her family's story. Love could wait. First, I must build myself, she would whisper into her pillow at night. Then I'll be ready for whatever comes. She poured all her energy into her studies, her faith, and the silent promise she made to herself. What she didn't realize was that life was already taking notes, waiting for the right moment to test the very foundations she was so carefully building. By her second year, the tight fortress around Adiz's heart had begun to show a few cracks. She wasn't the timid village girl anymore. A quiet confidence had started to bloom. Her grades were excellent. Her lecturers knew her by name, and she had nurtured a small, loyal circle of friends. That's when she met Tund. He was the very picture of confidence, tall, with a smooth voice and a smile that seemed to light up any room he entered. As a final-year student, he was a well-known figure on campus, a master of charm. But Adiz didn't see that. She only saw the kindness in his voice and the focused attention she had craved for so long. He started waiting for her after lectures, taking her heavy books from her arms and walking her to her hostel gate. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her dreams. He laughed at her shy jokes and gave her a pet name, my gentle Ada. No one had ever looked at her like that before. For the first time, Adiz felt truly seen, not as the serious girl or the nun, but as a woman. Her friends' teasing was relentless, but she secretly cherished every moment of it. The weeks melted into months, and Tund seemed flawless. He told her she was different from every other girl he'd ever met. He called her decent, pure, special. His words were a balm to her soul. He painted a beautiful picture of their future together, a family they would build, a life where she was right by his side after graduation. And Adiz, who had guarded her heart for so long, believed every single word. She finally let her walls crumble. One quiet evening, after the stress of exams had faded and the campus was hushed and nearly empty, she allowed herself to trust him completely. It wasn't planned. It was an act of pure affection, of unwavering faith, and a desperate desire to prove that her love for him was real and absolute. She never imagined that one night would change everything. After that, things began to shift. Tund, the man who had promised her the world, became distant. First, a few missed calls, then weak excuses. When she visited his hostel, his roommates would just say he wasn't around. And when she finally did see him, he smiled that same easy smile and said, "You're taking this too seriously, Ada. Don't be so emotional." In that single moment, she understood. The promises, the sweet words, they had all been a mask. Heartbroken, she withdrew from everyone. But a few weeks later, something else started. She began to feel unwell. Fever, pain, and an unusual odor she couldn't understand. For weeks, Adiz carried this secret, a secret that grew heavier with each passing day. She didn't go to the clinic. When she finally did, the nurse told her she had an infection, something that could be treated easily. But Adiz's shame held her back. She couldn't bring herself to return for the follow-up care. Every time she even thought about walking back into that clinic, her heart would fill with fear. What if someone saw her there? What if the nurses whispered about her? What if her friends found out? The thought alone made her stomach tighten. So, she said nothing. She told herself it would probably go away on its own, that she was young, and her body would fight it. After all, she looked fine on the outside. She smiled in class, took notes, and went about her days as if everything was perfectly normal. But at night, when the hostel grew quiet and her roommates were asleep, the truth would come for her. The discomfort, the burning pain, the smell she couldn't ignore. She would lie awake, ashamed and terrified, hating herself for trusting Tund, for believing his empty words. But mostly, she blamed herself for being ignorant. She tried everything she could think of, bathing more often, using scented soap, even drinking herbal mixtures from a roadside vendor. But nothing helped. Some days, it even made things worse. Her grades began to suffer. She found it hard to focus in class. When her lecturer called her name and she didn't answer quickly, her classmates would laugh, thinking she was just distracted by heartbreak. No one knew the real burden she was carrying. She started avoiding people, stopped going out with friends, stopped attending fellowship. The once bright, determined girl became quiet and withdrawn. One afternoon, her roommate, Ngozi, found her sitting alone and asked gently, "Ada, are you okay? You've not been yourself these days." Adiz forced a small smile. "I'm fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. Her body was sending her signals she didn't understand, and her silence was only making everything worse. She wanted to talk to someone, but she didn't know how. She was terrified of being judged, labeled, or pitted, so she kept pretending. Weeks turned into months. Sometimes she felt better, and she would convince herself the infection was gone. But then the symptoms would return, sharper and angrier than before. In those moments, she'd remember her mother's words from years ago. A woman must keep herself clean. Adiz now realized that cleanliness wasn't just about soap and water. It was about understanding, about care, about knowledge. But she had no one to guide her. By the time Adiz graduated, she had learned to live with the quiet shame that followed her like a shadow. Though the worst of the pain was gone, the odor, that sharp, unpleasant smell she couldn't fully control, still lingered. It made her feel small, unworthy, and unclean. She bathed several times a day, changed her clothes constantly, and used perfumes, powders, and herbs, anything that might hide the scent. But deep down, she knew it wasn't gone. Each time she caught even the faintest trace of it, her heart would sink. She avoided sitting too close to people. She declined invitations to social gatherings. She learned to keep her distance, from laughter, from friendship, and from the possibility of love. Inside, she carried an ache that words couldn't describe. She wanted to be like other women, free, confident, and sure of herself. But instead, she moved through the world afraid to breathe too deeply. When people complimented her beauty, she'd smile politely, but inside she would think, if only you knew. After university, she returned home and found work as a teaching assistant. The children loved her. She was patient and kind. But even with them, she kept her heart guarded. Her mother began to worry. "Adiz, you're a woman now," she would say gently. "Don't you want to marry?" Adiz would just force a smile. "When the time is right, Mama." But she didn't believe there would ever be a right time. Who would want her, knowing her secret? Then one morning, everything started to change. She met Chaik at the school. He had come to repair the broken classroom doors. He was tall, quiet, and steady, a man who didn't talk much, but whose eyes held a genuine warmth. He noticed her not because she tried to be noticed, but because of how she carried herself. Modestly, carefully, always putting others first. At first, Adiz kept her distance. She was polite but reserved, as she was with everyone. But Chaik didn't give up easily. Every time he came to the school, he greeted her with a smile and a soft, "Good morning, Miss Ada." Weeks passed. He started bringing roasted corn or plantain to share during breaks. Sometimes they talked about the weather, about work, about little things. His gentleness slowly began to disarm her. He never pushed, never pried. He simply listened. For the first time in years, Adiz felt safe in someone's presence. She began to laugh again, small, quiet laughter at first, but it was real. Still, a wall remained between them. She couldn't tell him the truth about the infection, about the odor that still haunted her. She was terrified he would notice it and walk away. And yet, the more time they spent together, the more she wished she could believe that someone could see beyond her shame. One day, Chaik walked her home after a long day at school. As they reached her gate, he turned to her and said softly, "Adiz, you always seem to carry something heavy inside you. I don't know what it is, but I want you to know you don't have to hide it from me." She froze. No one had ever said that to her before. For a long moment, she said nothing, her mind a whirlwind of unspoken fears. This was Chaik, a man whose presence had quietly crept into her life, offering a gentleness she hadn't known she was missing. As Adiz and Chaik began to grow closer, their friendship slowly deepened into something neither of them had planned. It wasn't a rushed or wild romance, the kind that burns bright and fast. No, theirs was quiet, patient, and real, like a slow-growing tree with deep roots. One weekend, after a heavy downpour flooded her compound, turning her small yard into a muddy lake, Chaik insisted she stay at his house until the water subsided. Her first instinct was to refuse. The thought of what people might say, the whispers and judgments, was enough to make her want to retreat into her waterlogged home. But Chaik was persistent, his concern genuine. You'll have your own room, Adiz. I just don't want you falling sick from the dampness." So, hesitantly, she agreed. That evening, as she unpacked her small bag in his spare room, a familiar chill crept over her. It was that old fear, a whisper in her mind reminding her of the odor, the shame, the past she could never completely outrun. The very first thing she did was go straight to the bathroom. She scrubbed her skin, bathed with meticulous care, and washed herself as if trying to erase a stain no one else could see. An hour later, she went again, and then again. By the third time, Chaik knocked gently on the bathroom door. "Adiz," he said softly, a hint of amusement in his voice. "If you keep bathing like this, there will be no water left for tomorrow morning." She laughed nervously through the closed door. "I just like to stay clean," she said quickly, praying he wouldn't ask any more questions. But inside, she wasn't laughing at all. She was terrified. Terrified that if she didn't keep herself spotless, he might notice the faint, betraying smell she still carried sometimes. And then, everything, this fragile, beautiful thing they were building, would fall apart. Later, as they ate dinner together, Chaik noticed her quietness. Her laughter came a second too late. Her eyes seemed to be looking at something far away. He didn't press her. He simply made sure she was comfortable, his presence a silent reassurance. When he offered her his own room, saying he'd sleep in the sitting room, she protested immediately. "No, no, I'll be fine here." But he just smiled that warm, easy smile of his. "I know you will. Good night, Adiz." That night, Adiz barely slept. She lay awake, the kindness he showed her replaying in her mind. He was so patient, so understanding, and it made her feel utterly undeserving. She wanted to tell him everything, to confess every fear and every insecurity that held her captive, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. The next morning, when Chaik returned from fixing a neighbor's fence, he found her in the middle of her bathing ritual again. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're the cleanest guest I've ever had," he teased. She managed a shy smile, but said nothing. Inside, she felt a strange mix of embarrassment and profound relief. He hadn't noticed. He hadn't recoiled. Days turned into weeks, and their bond continued to grow. They spent more and more time together, sharing stories and dreams, but Adiz always maintained a careful, almost imperceptible distance. Whenever he tried to hold her hand for too long, she would find an excuse to pull away. When his affection grew warmer, she grew quieter, retreating into herself. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sun paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, he turned to her, his expression serious. "Adiz," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm. "I care about you a great deal, but sometimes it feels like you're afraid of me. Have I done something wrong?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. She hesitated, then finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "No, Chaik, you've done nothing wrong. It's just, I've made mistakes before. The man I trusted most. He left me after I gave him everything. I can't go through that kind of pain again." He was silent for a moment, processing her words, then he nodded slowly. "I understand." But she wasn't finished. Bolstered by a surge of courage, she turned to him, her eyes filled with both fear and a newfound strength. "If you truly love me, Chaik, please wait. Wait until you marry me. Then I'll be yours completely. But before that, I need to protect what's left of me." Chaik didn't hesitate for a second. He took her hand gently, his touch firm and steady. "Adiz, I didn't come into your life to take what's yours. I came to stay, however long it takes." Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. In that moment, she realized something profound, a truth she had never known before. Love didn't have to hurt. It didn't have to be begged for or traded for empty promises. It could be patient. It could be kind. And that was the love she chose. From that day forward, Adiz stopped hiding behind endless baths and fearful silence. She began to heal, not because she had suddenly become perfect, but because she had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and chose her anyway. Even as their love blossomed, a small, heavily guarded part of her remained locked away. She had told him about her heartbreak, her fears, and her struggles with trust, but not about the one thing that haunted her the most, the odor. It wasn't as persistent as before, not an everyday torment. But some mornings, it would return, faint, unwelcome, and cruel. Whenever she noticed it, her heart would tighten in a familiar knot of anxiety. She would rush to the bathroom, wash herself with painstaking care, and spray perfume until she could smell nothing but a cloud of flowers. To everyone else, she was the picture of a woman in love, finally happy and at peace. But inside, she lived in a state of quiet panic. What if one day he noticed? What if the smell appeared when they were close, in an intimate moment? What if it was the one thing that could ruin everything they had built? So, she developed a system of subtle defenses. She bathed several times a day, a ritual that had become second nature. She washed her clothes more often than necessary, ensuring they were always fresh. She even learned to sit just slightly apart from him when they were alone, creating just enough space that he wouldn't lean in too close unexpectedly. Chaik, for his part, never questioned her habits anymore. He had accepted that she liked to be exceptionally clean, and he found it endearing, even amusing at times. "You'll make a perfect wife," he teased her one day as she folded a mountain of fresh laundry. "My house will always smell of soap and flowers." She smiled, but inside, his innocent words pricked something tender and raw within her. She desperately wanted to be that for him. Perfect, clean, confident, but she knew she was hiding a secret she believed was her greatest flaw. Whenever the topic of marriage came up, her joy was always tainted with a sharp edge of fear. She longed for it more than anything, yet she dreaded what living under the same roof, sharing the same bed, might reveal. There would be no place to hide forever, but Chaik's love was steady, like water patiently wearing down a stone. He was consistent, he was kind, and his affection never wavered. And slowly, so slowly, Adiz began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future free from shame. One afternoon, he took her to meet his family. It was a big step, one that made her stomach flutter with nerves. But they welcomed her with open arms and warm smiles. As she sat in their living room, she saw the undeniable pride in his mother's eyes as she looked at her son, and then at her. They saw her as Chaik's future, a part of their family. In that moment, sitting amongst the people who loved him, the walls around her heart began to feel a little less like a prison, and a little more like a fortress she might, one day, be able to leave. If this story touched your heart, please consider hitting that like button. The wedding was everything I had prayed for, a whirlwind of music, laughter, and pure, unadulterated joy. Chaik looked at me as if I was the only person in the world, and in those precious hours, I let myself believe that nothing could ever go wrong again. But as the celebration wound down and the last guest departed, a familiar, cold fear began to creep back into my heart. This was the moment I had been dreading. Throughout all the preparations, the dress fittings, the vows, the endless photographs, I had managed to push one thought to the very back of my mind: the wedding night. Now, there was nowhere left to run. In the quiet of our new home, Chaik held my hand. He was just as kind, patient, and warm as he had always been. But my heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drum of worry. I had prayed so hard that the odor wouldn't return. I had convinced myself that the medicines, the meticulous care, the countless baths, that all of it would be enough. But as the night wore on, my deepest fear became a crushing reality. I saw it in the almost imperceptible shift in his expression, a slight pause, a momentary distance that appeared in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask any questions or do anything to make me feel small. When it was over, he just quietly excused himself and went to wash up. But that silence, it was louder than any accusation could ever be. I sat motionless on the bed, my hands trembling. A wave of shame, cold and sharp, washed over me. I wanted to cry, to explain everything, to beg him to understand, but the words were lodged in my throat. When Chai came back, he offered a faint smile and lay down beside me. He said nothing about what had just happened, and I, in turn, said nothing either. We both pretended the silence was a peaceful one, even though we knew, deep down, that it was anything but. In the days that followed, that silence became a heavy stone in my chest. Chaik was gentle, as always, but something had shifted. An invisible wall of unspoken discomfort now stood between us, and neither of us knew how to tear it down. At night, I would lie awake, replaying that moment over and over, feeling the sting of humiliation all over again. The very thing I had feared for so long had finally happened. But as I lay there in the dark, I made myself a promise. I will not let this destroy me. I resolved to find a way, to seek real help, to heal completely, and to reclaim my body and my confidence. I knew I had to do it for myself, not just for Chaik. And I held on to a sliver of hope that one day, when I finally found the courage to speak the truth, he would still look at me with the same kindness he had on our wedding day. I knew true love wasn't about being perfect. It was about facing the truth, no matter how painful. I wasn't ready to speak yet, but I knew in time I would be. Chaik still loved me. I knew that, but something had definitely changed after our wedding night. He couldn't bring himself to mention it, the odor he had noticed. Every time the thought of saying something crossed his mind, he told me later, he'd see my soft, trusting eyes, and fear would stop him. If I say it, I might hurt her, he thought. If I stay silent, maybe it will just go away. So he chose silence. He became even more tender, if that was possible, but a space had opened up between us, invisible yet heavy. Sometimes I would reach for him in the night, desperate to feel close, to erase the growing uneasiness I felt. But Chaik would gently pull away, murmuring that he was tired or had an early morning. I never questioned him out loud, but inside, each rejection felt like a fresh bruise. I started to wonder if I had done something wrong, or worse, if he had simply stopped loving me. At night, I'd lie beside him, wide awake, my heart aching with unspoken questions. Do you still find me beautiful? Do you still want me? But the words always died on my lips. And Chaik, lying just inches away, wrestled with his own guilt. He couldn't tell me that the smell made him uncomfortable. He couldn't bear the thought of seeing me cry. So he swallowed the truth, night after night, until the silence between us solidified into a wall. We were two people who loved each other deeply, yet we were trapped, unable to bridge the distance that was growing between us. I prayed constantly, asking God to heal whatever was wrong in my body and to mend whatever was breaking in our hearts. Chaik, I would later learn, was praying too, asking for the courage to speak gently when the time was right. Weeks bled into months. We learned to live around the silence. We shared laughter during the day, but our hearts remained guarded in the dark. Still, even a wounded love has a way of enduring. Chaik never stopped caring for me. He'd bring me small gifts, wait for me after work, and look at me with a quiet admiration that confused and comforted me at the same time. And I, even while feeling completely unworthy, continued to care for him with the same devotion as before. We were two people bound by affection but separated by fear, both terrified that the truth might shatter the fragile peace our silence had created. But deep down, a realization began to dawn on me. Healing couldn't happen while we were pretending. Sooner or later, I would have to face the truth for both our sakes. And I knew that when I finally did, our marriage would never be the same. Not because it would end, but because it would finally have a chance to honestly begin. The days had begun to grow warmer when I first started to notice the changes in my body. At first, I dismissed it as simple exhaustion. I felt dizzy in the mornings, my appetite was all over the place, and I found myself drifting off to sleep no matter how hard I tried to stay awake. Maybe I was just run down from the stress of it all. But then came the nausea, a persistent queasiness that clung to me throughout the day. A tiny, unbelievable thought began to flicker in the back of my mind. It seemed impossible, a cruel joke, given the distance that had grown between me and Chaik. But the signs were becoming too strong to ignore. One afternoon, with my hands trembling, I took a test. I waited, my heart pounding in my ears, each second stretching into an eternity. And then I saw it. 2 lines. Clear and undeniable. I was pregnant. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me. There was a surge of joy, so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. A baby. Our baby. But immediately following, it was a tidal wave of fear. How could I bring a child into this? Into a marriage held together by silence and unspoken pain? How could I tell Chaik? What would he think? Would he see this as a blessing, or as another complication in our already strained relationship? That evening, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. We ate dinner in our usual, quiet way. But the secret felt like a living thing inside me, pulsing with a life of its own. I watched Chaik, searching his face for some sign, some clue as to how he might react. He smiled at me, his usual gentle smile, but his eyes seemed so far away. The fear of his rejection was paralyzing. What if he thought the baby wasn't his? The thought was a poison dart to my heart. We had been distant, yes, but we were still husband and wife. The doubt, however, was a cruel symptom of the sickness in our marriage. Days passed, and my secret grew heavier. The morning sickness became a constant companion, a physical manifestation of the turmoil inside me. I knew I couldn't hide it forever. I had to tell him. I deserved to share this joy, and he deserved to know he was going to be a father. Finally, one evening, I took a deep breath and decided this was it. He was reading in the living room, the light from the lamp casting a warm glow around him. I sat down on the floor by his feet, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Chike," I began, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up from his book, his brow furrowed with concern. "Adiz, what is it? You don't look well." Tears welled up in my eyes. The dam of silence I had so carefully constructed was finally about to break. "Chike," I said again, my voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you. We are going to have a baby." I held my breath, bracing myself for his reaction, ready for the world to come crashing down. This was the moment. The truth was out, and everything was about to change. But then, the signs started getting clearer. Her body felt different, heavier in some places, lighter in others. She found herself smiling for no reason, and then crying at the smallest things. Still, she didn't say a word to Chike. After weeks of just quietly observing, she decided to visit the small clinic near their street. The nurse there was a gentle woman with such warm eyes. She listened to Adiz's symptoms and just smiled, as if she already knew. "Let's just run a small test, my dear," she said. Adiz waited, twisting her fingers together, her heart absolutely racing. Those minutes felt like an eternity, stretching long and silent. When the nurse finally came back, she was holding a piece of paper and had a huge grin on her face. "Congratulations, Adiz," she said softly. "You're going to be a mother." For a moment, Adiz couldn't even breathe. The words just hung in the air, like a beautiful song she couldn't believe she was hearing. She pressed her hand against her stomach, her eyes welling up with tears. "A mother," she whispered. "Me?" All the pain she had been carrying, the shame, the fear, the heavy silence, it all seemed to just fade away in that one moment, replaced by a bright, fragile joy. When she got home, Chike was sitting in the living room, reading. She stood there quietly for a while, just watching him, wondering how she was going to tell him. Then, with a trembling smile, she said, "Chike, I went to the clinic today." He looked up immediately, concern flashing in his eyes. "Is everything all right?" She nodded, tears already starting to slip down her cheeks. "Yes, everything is fine. In fact, it's more than fine." He stood up, looking confused but hopeful. "Adiz, what is it?" She took his hand, placed it gently on her belly, and whispered, "We're going to have a baby." For a second, he just stared at her, as if he needed to make sure he heard her correctly. Then his face broke into the widest, most brilliant smile she had ever seen. "Adiz," he exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. "You mean it? You're serious?" She just nodded, laughing through her tears. He lifted her right off the ground, spinning her around, and his laughter echoed through their small house. It was the first time in such a long while that their joy felt completely pure, untouched by fear or silence. That night, they just sat together for hours, talking about the future. They talked about baby names, tiny clothes, and the kind of parents they dreamed of being. For the first time since their wedding, the air between them felt light and easy again. As Adiz drifted off to sleep, she placed her hand over her stomach and whispered a prayer of gratitude. "This child," she thought, "this will be the beginning of something new, not just for me, but for us." She had no idea what the months ahead would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt truly, genuinely hopeful. It was as if the child growing inside her might also have the power to heal the parts of her heart that had been broken for so long. Pregnancy changed Adiz in more ways than she ever could have expected. Her body felt alive in a whole new way. It was restless, tender, and just full of emotions she could hardly even name. Some days, she was radiant and full of joy. Other days, she felt like a complete stranger in her own skin. But through all of it, she craved closeness. Not just comfort, but a real connection. She wanted to feel loved. She wanted to feel seen, reassured. Chike was kind and incredibly caring. He was so attentive. He made sure she ate well. He helped with the chores, and he would often rub her feet when they swelled up. He would even speak softly to her belly, calling their unborn child our little miracle. And yet, despite all this affection, there was still a distance between them. It was the same quiet wall that had gone up on their wedding night. Whenever Adiz would reach out for him, even just to rest her head against his shoulder for a little bit longer. She noticed he would tense up slightly and then find a gentle excuse to move away. He'd smile and say he was tired or busy or that he had something to finish. He was always kind about it, never cruel, but he was always distant. At first, she tried to tell herself it was just his way of being cautious because of the pregnancy. But as the weeks turned into months, the ache inside her grew stronger. She just didn't understand why. He loved her, didn't he? He had been so incredibly happy when he found out about the baby. So why did it feel like he was pulling further and further away? Adiz began to carry her questions silently, too afraid of what the answers might be. She feared that maybe she wasn't good enough anymore, or that something about her had changed, something he no longer found beautiful. Sometimes, when he was asleep beside her, she would just watch him and whisper softly, "Do you still love me the same way?" He never heard her, of course, and she never got an answer. Chaik, on the other hand, was battling his own private guilt. He still remembered the odor from that first night. Even though he tried with all his might to push the memory away, it haunted him every time she drew close. He just didn't know how to talk about it. He didn't want to hurt her or make her feel less of herself. So he kept quiet, convincing himself that his silence was a form of kindness. But Adiz's silence came from a place of pain, and his came from a place of fear. And between the two, their love began to grow lonely. Even so, they both held on. They smiled in public, they prayed together every single evening, and they waited for their baby with so much hope. Adiz kept telling herself that once the child was born, things would change. They would find their way back to the warmth they once shared. But deep in her heart, she also knew that true healing would only come when the truth was finally spoken, when their love was brave enough to face what silence had been hiding all this time. And until that day came, she carried her longing quietly, like a song she could hum to herself, but never sing out loud. With each passing month, Adiz's belly grew, a beautiful, round testament to the new life she carried. Her steps became slower, her breaths heavier, and her nights were often restless. But even in her discomfort, a quiet joy bloomed within her. Every tiny kick, every flutter, was a reminder that something good was growing from her pain, a promise of a future she desperately hoped for. Chaik was a constant, attentive presence by her side. He went with her to every clinic visit, fussing over her diet and making sure she never lifted anything heavy. He would often smile, a reassuring, gentle smile, and say, "Once you've had the baby, Adiz, everything will go back to normal." But whenever she tried to bridge the gap between them, to feel his touch, he would gently hold her by the shoulders, creating a space she couldn't cross. "You're pregnant," he'd explain softly. "Let's just wait until after the baby comes. I don't want to stress you." His words were always kind, his tone so convincing. And Adiz, wanting so badly to believe in the goodness of her husband, accepted it. She told herself it was love, a form of protection. He was just being a cautious, caring husband, looking out for his wife and their unborn child. So she waited. She filled her days with daydreams of the future, telling herself that once the baby arrived, he would hold her again like he used to. He would whisper soft words into her ear, and they would finally find the closeness she had been longing for since their wedding night. Then, one hazy early morning, the pains began. Her labor was long and arduous, a marathon of sweat, tears, and whispered prayers. But the moment she heard that first, sharp cry from her baby, every ache, every moment of agony, simply vanished. The midwife gently placed the tiny, wriggling bundle into her arms, and Adiz couldn't stop the tears of joy that streamed down her face. "A boy," Chaik said, his voice thick with emotion, his own eyes glistening. "Our son." He leaned in, kissed her forehead, and thanked God aloud, his arms embracing both mother and child. In that one perfect moment, surrounded by the miracle of new life, Adiz truly believed their love had been reborn. But the days that followed painted a very different picture. She waited, patiently, for the closeness to return. She waited for the gentle touches, the shared warmth in their bed, the quiet laughter in the dark. But nothing changed. Chaik remained a kind and dutiful husband. He provided for every need. He was gentle and loving with the baby, but with her, a quiet, unbreachable distance remained. When she reached for him, he would offer a faint smile and a familiar excuse. "You just gave birth, Adiz." You need to recover fully. Let's wait. At first, she accepted it. Of course, her body needed time to heal. But weeks bled into months, and the distance didn't shrink. It grew, stretching out between them like an invisible wall. The excuses continued, each one a small, sharp prick to her already heavy heart. Night after night, she would lie awake beside him, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. A storm of questions raged inside her. Had she done something wrong? Was she no longer desirable to him? Had the love she thought was so strong quietly died between them without her even noticing? The silence in their room was deafening, amplifying her loneliness until it was a physical pain in her chest. Eventually, the pain became too much to bear in silence. One afternoon, while Chaik was at work, Adiz found herself walking to his elder sister's house. Ngozi was a woman she deeply respected, someone who had always treated her with the warmth and kindness of a true sister. The moment Ngozi opened the door, she saw it. She saw the sadness in Adiz's eyes, a deep-seated sorrow that no polite smile could hide. "My sister," Ngozi said softly, leading her inside. "You look so tired. Is everything all right at home?" Adiz hesitated, her hands trembling in her lap. For months, she had held this pain inside, letting it fester in the darkness. But now, in the warmth of Ngozi's gentle gaze, the dam broke. "I don't understand my husband anymore," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Ever since our wedding night, he's been distant. During the pregnancy, he said we should wait for the baby. But now our son is here, and nothing has changed." Her voice broke, and tears finally spilled over, tracing paths of her silent suffering down her cheeks. "He's kind to me, Ngozi. He provides everything. He helps with the baby. But he doesn't touch me. He doesn't even hold me. I feel like I'm invisible in my own home." Ngozi listened without interruption, her expression softening with a profound sympathy. She reached across the table and took Adiz's trembling hand in hers. "My dear, you have carried this burden alone for far too long," she said, her voice a soothing balm. "Don't lose hope. I will talk to my brother. I'll be gentle. But you must promise me something, Adiz. No more silence. If something is hurting you, you must speak. You have suffered enough in silence." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a small wave of relief washed over Adiz. Someone finally knew. The secret was no longer hers alone to carry. As she walked home that evening, the setting sun casting a soft, golden glow around her, she didn't know what Ngozi would say to Chaik, or how he would react. She didn't know if this would fix her marriage or shatter it completely. But she knew one thing for certain. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine. And perhaps, acknowledging that truth, speaking it aloud, was the first real step toward healing, not just for her body, but for her heart and for the future of her marriage. Ngozi didn't rush to confront her brother. She was wise. She understood the delicate nature of a marriage and the deep-seated pride of a man. She prayed first, long and hard, asking for the right words, for wisdom, for a way to help without causing a deeper wound. This was a fragile situation, and she knew she had to handle it with the utmost care. A few days later, when Chaik came to visit her after work, she waited until they had finished eating before bringing up the matter. "My brother," she began softly, "how is Adiz? How is the baby?" Chaik smiled. "They are fine. Adiz is a wonderful mother." Ngozi nodded. "I know she is. But what about you two? How are you both doing, as husband and wife?" Chaik's smile faded slightly. He looked down, busying himself with his phone. "We're all right," he said, his tone carefully neutral. Ngozi sighed quietly. "You see, I'm not asking as your sister only, but as someone who cares about both of you. Adiz came to me. She's hurting, Chaik." His head snapped up. "Hurting? What do you mean?" "She feels you've become distant," Ngozi said gently. "She says even before the pregnancy, things were not as they should be. She's confused and blames herself for it. You've built a good home, yes, but love is more than paying bills and caring for a child. She needs you." Chaik went quiet for a long moment. His shoulders slumped. "Ngozi, you don't understand." "Then help me understand," she said patiently. He took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "It's not that I don't love her. God knows I do. But something happened on our wedding night. It caught me off guard. I noticed," he hesitated, lowering his voice, "a strong odor. It shocked me, and I didn't know how to talk to her about it without hurting her." Ngozi listened quietly, nodding for him to continue. "I thought it would fade," he went on. but I was afraid of bringing it up. I didn't want to embarrass her. So I avoided her instead, telling myself I was protecting her feelings. But I think I've only made things worse. Ngozi sighed deeply, her heart heavy with compassion. Chike, you made a mistake, yes, but not out of cruelty, out of fear. Still, silence can hurt just as much as words. Adiz doesn't know what's wrong, and she thinks she's the problem. He covered his face with his hands. What should I do now? Talk to her, Ngozi said simply. With love, with patience. Let her know what you noticed, but speak gently. And help her find proper medical care. She has been carrying shame she didn't deserve. You are her husband, not her judge. This is your battle together. Chike nodded slowly, her words sinking deep. For the first time, he saw how his silence had imprisoned them both. That evening, he drove home quietly, his mind full of memories, their laughter, their shared dreams, the long months of distance. He realized how much he missed her, how much he wanted to hold her without fear. When he entered the house, Adiz was sitting in the living room, rocking their baby to sleep. She looked up, tired but smiling softly. He stood there for a moment, watching her, the woman who had given him love, forgiveness, and now a son. He knew what he had to do. He sat beside her and took her hand gently. Adiz, he said, his voice trembling, we need to talk. Her heart skipped a beat. She could see in his eyes that this wasn't anger, it was honesty. And for the first time since their wedding, they were about to face the truth together, not as strangers bound by duty, but as partners finally brave enough to heal. The house was quiet that evening. The baby was asleep, the lights dim, and for once, there was no noise between them, no distractions, no excuses. Only truth waiting to be spoken. Chike sat beside Adiz, his hands folded nervously. For a moment, he didn't know how to begin. Then, softly, he said, Adiz, please don't be afraid of what I'm about to say. I've been silent for too long, and it has hurt us both. She turned to look at him, confusion clouding her eyes. What is it, Chike? Did I do something wrong? He shook his head. No, you didn't. The fault is mine. From our wedding night till now, I noticed something but didn't know how to talk about it. I was scared of hurting you. Adiz's heart began to race. What did you notice? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. That night, I noticed a strong odor. I didn't understand it. I thought maybe it was something temporary. But instead of asking you, I stayed quiet. I didn't want you to feel ashamed. For a long moment, Adiz said nothing. She stared at the floor, her fingers trembling. The truth, the thing she had hidden for so long, was now out in the open. Tears welled in her eyes. I knew, she whispered, her voice shaking. I knew there was something wrong with me. I just didn't know what to do. I was too shy to talk to anyone about it. Even before we got married, I noticed it sometimes. I thought it would go away on its own. Her voice broke completely. I didn't want you to think I was dirty or cursed. Chike's chest tightened. He reached for her hand. Adiz, I would never think that of you. You've carried this burden alone, and that's my fault too. I should have asked. I should have helped. She sobbed quietly, the weight of years of silence spilling out. I was just afraid. I didn't know how to talk about something so embarrassing. My parents never taught me these things. I learned on my own, the wrong way. Chike drew closer, his voice steady but full of emotion. Then let's learn together now. No more shame. No more hiding. We'll go to a doctor, a good one. We'll get answers, and we'll fix this. You're my wife, Adiz. Whatever affects you affects me. Adiz looked at him through her tears, disbelief written across her face. You mean you'll go with me? Of course, he said without hesitation. We'll face it together. That's what marriage is supposed to be. In that moment, something shifted inside her. A slow, quiet healing that began not from medicine, but from love finally spoken aloud. For the first time in years, she felt light. The shame that had followed her since girlhood began to fade, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. She rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, Thank you, Chike. I thought I had lost you. I thought I was unworthy. This story is a powerful reminder that in a partnership, no one should carry their burdens alone. Open, honest communication, even when it's difficult, is the foundation of a strong and healing love. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic, but Adiz barely noticed. Her hands were trembling as Chike, her partner, held them gently, reassuringly. She had walked into this moment with so much fear in her heart, but also with a tiny flicker of hope. Hope that finally, she could be free from the shadow that had followed her for so long. The doctor greeted them warmly and explained the tests. Adi's pulse quickened as he began to review her results. Adiz, he said gently, your infection is a sexually transmitted disease. The good news is that it's treatable, but it needs proper medical care and a strict regimen. I'll prescribe the treatment, and you should follow up regularly. For a moment, the words just hung in the air, not quite sinking in. Asterisk sexually transmitted disease. Asterisk the memory of her university boyfriend flashed through her mind. Tunned, the man she had trusted, the man who had left her. She swallowed hard. It was true. That was how it had all started. That careless trust, that first heartbreak, and the silent shame she had carried with her ever since. Tears welled up in her eyes, and Chike squeezed her hand, his grip a firm anchor in the storm of her emotions. Adiz, he said softly, his voice full of a tenderness she hadn't heard in years. It's okay. You didn't do this on purpose. We'll deal with it, together. She shook her head, a sob catching in her throat, a mix of grief and overwhelming relief. I knew. I remember him. I just never thought it would affect me for this long. I thought I could just wash it away, or that it would disappear on its own. The doctor interrupted kindly, his voice steady and professional. What matters now is that we treat it properly. With the right medication and care, you can fully recover. Chike leaned closer and whispered, just for her, we'll start today. I'll be with you every single step of the way. For the first time in years, Adiz felt a physical weight lift from her shoulders. The shame, the fear, the heavy secret. She didn't have to carry it all by herself anymore. She looked at Chike, and gratitude shone in her tear-filled eyes. I was so scared to tell anyone, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Even you. I thought you'd hate me if you knew the truth. Chike shook his head firmly, his gaze unwavering. Adiz, there is nothing about you that could ever make me hate you. This doesn't change the woman I love, the mother of my child, or the partner I want to spend my life with. We'll heal, body and heart, together. She leaned against him, finally letting her tears fall freely. All the years of fear, of silence, of shame, just poured out in that one moment. And for the first time, she felt the beginnings of freedom, not just from the illness itself, but from the heavy burden she had carried alone for so long. As they left the clinic, Adiz held Chike's hand tightly. The world outside felt brighter, lighter, full of possibilities. This wasn't an end. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would no longer be trapped by silence or shame, but could face life openly, bravely, and with the man who truly loved her by her side. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Adiz had ever faced, but they were also the most hopeful. She followed the doctor's instructions to the letter, taking her medications exactly as prescribed. She never missed a follow-up appointment, and with each visit, she learned more about her body and her health. Every small improvement, a symptom easing, a test result getting better, felt like a monumental victory. And Chike stayed right by her side through it all. He came with her to the clinic. He gently reminded her to take her medication, and he made her feel loved without ever making her feel pressured. Slowly, Adiz began to realize something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in years. She could be safe, cared for, and still deeply loved, despite her past. As her body healed, something amazing happened. She started to regain confidence in herself. She began wearing the colorful clothes she loved again, catching her reflection in the mirror and not immediately looking away in shame. That constant shadow of fear and embarrassment that had once ruled her life began to recede. But the healing wasn't only physical. It was emotional, too. Adiz and Chike started talking more openly than ever before, about their fears, their dreams, about everything they had avoided for so long. She told him about her shyness as a young woman, her ignorance about her own body, and how she had endured the infection silently for all those years. He listened without a single word of judgment, just holding her hand and reminding her that none of it made her any less worthy of love. Slowly, the closeness they had missed for so many years returned. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was gentle, patient, and mutual. Adiz was discovering that real love didn't have to be painful. One afternoon, she was cradling their child, watching Chike play with him on the floor, and a quiet, profound sense of peace washed over her. Asterisk I survived. I am loved. I am healing. I am enough. Asterisk her thoughts also began to turn to the other young women in her community, girls who, like her, had never been taught about their bodies, their health, or their rights. She wanted to help them, to make sure they didn't have to suffer in silence the way she had. Together, she and Chaik started small, talking to friends, offering guidance to neighbors, and gently encouraging girls to seek proper medical care and information about reproductive health. Adiz realized that her journey, as painful as it had been, could now give her a purpose that went far beyond her own life. Months later, during a follow-up appointment, the doctor smiled and confirmed that her treatment had been completely successful. Adiz cried quietly in the clinic, not tears of shame, but of pure relief and gratitude. That evening, she returned home and held her baby close. Chaik wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "You've come so far, Adiz. I am so incredibly proud of you." For the first time, she smiled without fear, without a trace of doubt. She had survived betrayal, illness, and years of silence, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and so deeply loved. Her past was still a part of her, yes, but it no longer defined her. She had reclaimed her body, her health, and her heart. And as she looked at her little family, all together, she knew that the future, bright, hopeful, and full of love, was finally hers to embrace. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this story. If it touched you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories of hope and healing.